Olá, seja bem-vindo a mais um podcast de Funds People. A economia de subscrição já faz parte do nosso dia-a-dia, nos vários serviços que contratamos, mas hoje vamos olhar para este tema numa perspectiva mais de investimento. Temos para isso connosco o Ali Dazar Atallah, ele é co-gestor do fundo Thematic Subscription Economy, um produto da Natixis Investment Managers, e a liderar esta conversa temos connosco o Carlos Pinto, gestor de carteiras na Optimize Investment Partners. Esperemos que esta conversa lhe seja útil. Carlos, please. Go ahead.
Muito obrigado, Margarida. Boa tarde a todos. Hi, Walid. I'm Carlos Pinto. As Margarida said, I'm a portfolio manager and fund selector at Optimize Investment Partners, an independent asset management company based in Lisbon, specialized in management of the mutual funds and discretionary accounts that serves institutional and retail clients. You're looking for our strategy, the disruption thematics or the new trends that will present the new economy. So the subscription economy is more than a relevant topic for this interesting conversation. I will start our conversation to ask you to define the term of the subscription economy on the broader way.
Okay. Hello, Carlos. So basically, when we talk about the subscription economy, it's an investment team where we are interested in the companies that monetize their products and services through a subscription. And logically, maybe the champions in that thematic are the likes of Netflix and Spotify, for instance. We expect that this market, as of today, is worth $650 billion. It's supposed to grow at 18% CAGR over the next 5 years to reach 1.5 trillion US dollars by the year 2025. And this growth will come by, first of all, because the companies that are already in the under the subscription economy model will grow faster than the rest of the market. And on top of that, we expect many other industries to come and shift towards that investment model. And we expect also this theme to inscribe itself over the long run because it's underpinned by 3 growth secular drivers, so long-term driver. First of all, it's technological innovation. The second would be changes in consumer preference. And the third is sustainability. And this is why we are really firm believer that this is a long-term trend that should provide value for investors.
Okay, fair enough. I have the perception that nowadays, the generality of the companies mainly related with services are implementing subscription services. But it is possible to frame this topic as a specific thematic and not to be more broad to generality of the companies?
Listen, it is obvious that there are industries that will never be considered as subscription. But since we were talking about services, it's going to depend actually on what the consumer wants. As a consumer, when they subscribe to something, it's something they want to consume on a given period of time. There are services that we want to consume in a punctual manner. Take the example of the restaurant industry. You might not be able to subscribe to that industry, but basically you can go to the restaurant on a punctual manner. The same could be about the hotel industry, which is a typical service industry. And you want to go there, you cannot subscribe for holidays in the end. You're going to go there when you decide to go there. But you mentioned the word services, and I'd like to stress that there are lots of product-based companies that are subscription-based. And I can mention 2 companies here, both operate in the healthcare industry. The first would be Menicon, which is a Japanese company that offers contact lenses based on subscription. And what's interesting is that this company is unique, first of all, in the world. It's based in Japan. It has more than 1.3 million subscribers. And basically, you're subscribed to the consumable that are contact lenses. You pay a monthly fee. You will receive every month a month worth of consumables to your home, whether it is contact lenses and eye care or contact lenses care. Another one also in the healthcare industry would be Dexcom. Dexcom is a company that specializes in the monitoring of diabetes. And basically you subscribe in order to receive to your home whatever sensor you might need in order to monitor your diabetes on a regular basis. So my point here is that, first of all, not all industries in the service industry might shift towards subscription, and not all industries within the subscription economy are only service-based. We have lots of companies that are product-based that might be actors within the subscription economy.
Clear. Could you please talk about the industries that you have adopted, this new way?
Sure. The way we approach the theme is through two different scopes. The first is from the eye of a consumer, and the other is from the eye of enterprises. So let's look at consumers first of all. And we just did the simple exercise of looking at where are consumers spending in terms of subscription as of today. Obviously, the first two names you might think about are the media streaming giants such as Netflix and Spotify. So basically, the industry of media has been adopting subscription for a while now. But you have, again, many industries that are shifting towards that model, like video games, for instance. Take console manufacturers such as Sony and Microsoft with Xbox. They are making you pay a subscription in order to be able to access live services, to be able to play online with friends, or even access a library of cloud-based gaming. Take the example of the connected fitness industry. A few years back, you used to buy a connected watch, or even at-home fitness. I mean, you used to buy a bike to exercise at home. Now companies are layering subscription on top of that. That's the example of a company such as Peloton that sells connected bikes at your home, for which you pay a subscription, and then you would have access to live courses and library of courses. Now, it's something that's really important for us is to dissociate the idea of subscription from the digital world. There's also lots of companies within the real economy that were born as subscription and that also utilize subscription. Think about your gym operator. It was always subscription based. Your telecom provider, even some utilities are subscription based. And I mentioned at the beginning two companies within the healthcare industry. Again, this shows that from a consumer point of view, there's a wide area of industries that utilize subscription, and we expect them to continue to increase as we go forward. Now, from an enterprise point of view, enterprises are big consumers of subscription. I guess the best example would be to look at office softwares. You and I, we are employed, and our employer pays a subscription to Microsoft in order for us to have access to Excel, PowerPoint, Teams, and Outlook, for instance. We both work in the financial industries. There's a big industry called the data provider and information services that's reliant on subscription. Take the example of Bloomberg. We all pay a subscription in order to have Bloomberg. There's a listed company that's called FactSet, and actually that's actually the main competitor of Bloomberg. That's subscription based. Think about MSCI also. A company such as MSCI is purely subscription based. We pay MSCI a subscription fee in order to have the breakdown of indices, to be able to put forward indices within our presentation and our reportings. It's the same in the legal industry. You're going to find the same in the pharmaceutical industry, in the medical industry. You find subscription in software as a service, in marketing services, listed real estate listings, and even telemedicine. Again, it's a universe that's really broad-based. It's all about who can afford to use a subscription and what industries can adopt them. And we expect many industries, again, to shift towards that business model.
Thank you. We observe some companies with type of subscriptions diversified. For example, Spotify. If on the one hand, with subscription payment model to access streaming music free of the advertisement, on other hand, the model free of charge, but revenues provided by advertisement. My question is if this model, the second, free of charge, fits with your screening process.
No, it doesn't. So the idea for us, when we call a company subscription-based, it should derive its revenue from a subscription payment. Okay. On the other hand, if you think about advertisement, it isn't depending on the end consumer itself. Advertising it itself, it's cyclical. So what we're looking for is a company that monetizes something through a subscription. It shouldn't be free. You have to pay in order to have to access. And the way we try to look at it is, every company that we're gonna study and evaluate should have a fixed number, or a clear number of paying users, and I stress on the word paying, and in front of that, an average revenue per user. This enables us, first of all, to have a very more precise, if you want, evaluation of future revenues, and be more precise in the way we value a company. And this is why we try to stray away from everything that's cyclical or that doesn't depend in the end on the subscription-based payment. And this is why I'd say advertised source of revenue for subscription businesses is not something we look at. It could be part of the business itself, but the main and core business should be subscription revenue for that sense.
Okay, perfectly clear. In a subscription model, it is crucial for the company that subscriptions are renewed. How these companies prevent consumers from canceling their subscriptions?
Sure. It's a question, first of all, of asking yourself, what are the needs of your clients? And subscription-based companies should put the client at the center of their business model. So what does the client need? First of all, the client wants a product that's convenient. Convenient means easy to use. You can use it wherever you are and whatever platform you are. You're not really confined to one single type of usage. And on top of that, what a client wants is value for the price they're paying. Take the example of Netflix. A few years back, Netflix membership was around $7. Now it's 14. And this is because Netflix has increased the value it's providing you for a price you're paying. And us as consumers, we are accepting to pay this price because we feel that the value is fine with regards to that price. On top of that, what a consumer wants, and this is very important, is that a service doesn't require any add-ons. What I mean by that is that you pay a fixed amount, you have access to a certain volume of services. You're not supposed to be able, you're not supposed to pay something on top of that to be able to utilize a service or anything. And if you think about it, it's supposed to be kind of what you call an all-you-can-eat model. If you're able to do that, and on top of that, having a product that evolves through times to respond to the changes in consumer behavior, to the economy itself, you won't be able just to limit the churn, but actually to increase the number of subscribers you have and grow over the long term.
Yes, perfect clear. My second question regarding the previous one, but in more deeper. In the more specific in the segmented B2C, like the case of Amazon Prime, you see that onboarding is much easier and more impulsive without any barrier to exits, and cancellation easy the same way. In your opinion, this trend will rise or needs to be more robust by adding some barriers to exit? Like defining a minimum period or
okay. So basically, Amazon Prime is something that for which you subscribe for 1 year, but I don't think it's something that's essential for a business to be able to succeed within that industry. If you think about it, sometimes you have users that are paying for a service that they might not need for a long period of time. And perfect example here would be a company called Chegg within the educational technology space, for which usually when you're a student, you're not going to be enrolled in a service that provides study tools over 1 year. You're going to use it maybe 4 to 6 months. And in that sense, Chegg would have a very high churn if you think about it. But that company was able also to increase its reach, having more and more clients, even though the churn is high. So the idea is not really to lock a consumer in, but really to be able to provide a service for whenever this consumer wants. But on the other hand, what you can do is propose a cheaper plan for 1 year. And this is what businesses offer other businesses. So you can subscribe for a year worth of service at a lower price. And it's beneficial for both the vendor and the company that sells it. A company that sells it would have a longer term client, and you as a client would pay less for a service that you know you're going to use for 1 year. So basically, it's not about locking in the client. It's about when does the client want to use a product for how long.
Okay. If you look at a company like Apple, essentially a hardware company, it has been focusing on the services and services circle, namely in subscription model. Actually, I guess currently corresponding approximately 20% of its revenues. My question is if this percentage of subscription services is investable on your criteria, and from what point do you consider investing?
Well, first of all, Apple is obviously a company we're monitoring. It's one of the big names. One of the biggest companies in the world. But when it comes to services and subscription, the subscription part within Apple's services segment are basically smaller than the 20%. So you have Apple Plus, Apple Music, and Apple Fitness. They're still quite small. So we're going to wait a bit for them to become much more, pronounced within the company's revenue stream. But if you want to ask me, how do we define the companies that are eligible for our investment universe? There are 3 ways of doing so. The first would be to look at sales. The big proportion of sales should come from subscription. And if they do, this company is directly eligible for our universe. A perfect example here would be Netflix, with 99% of its revenue coming from subscriptions, for instance. Now, the other part is if sales are not, subscription and sales are not material, we're going to look at profitability. So, and if the profitability stemming from subscription is high, we will consider adding this company into the universe. And here a perfect example would be Costco. So Costco is a company for which you pay a subscription in order to go to their huge supermarkets, to their huge warehouse, where you will buy products at a 15% discount versus a Walmart or other supermarkets. And when you look at the top line of Costco, subscription only represent 2% of the sales. Now, when you look at the profit, it's more than 2/3. So logically, Costco is a company that's making the most of its cash through the subscription itself rather than through selling products. So this is why we would be able to add a company such as Costco within our investment universe. And maybe the third point, and this is really fundamental for us because it would enable us to capture companies while they're transitioning into a subscription model. So companies usually, when they transition to subscription, their valuation becomes much richer due to the visibility they have. And what we try to do is focus on companies that go from little to maybe zero in terms of subscription, and where we see that potentially this subscription business will grow much faster than the rest of the business. And an example to illustrate that here would be Disney. Disney, a few years back in 2019, had a revenue of subscription maybe of 2%. And as soon as they announced Disney Plus, they announced their targets. We understood that Disney Plus was become something massive for Disney. And directly, it was eligible for our universe. We did our assessment to see that Disney Plus is going to become something really material. And as of today, Disney Plus is more than 30% in terms of sales for the company, more than 116 million subscribers in less than 18 months. And that would make the company also eligible. So 3 ways: sales, profit, or transitioning companies. And this is how we select or add companies into the investment universe.
Okay, clear. Beyond the main these criteria that you are under, which metrics do you use on your equity selection? For example, in terms of style, value versus growth, market cap, PEs, churn rate.
Listen, we use, logically, we're investing in equity market. We're going to look at the traditional metrics for every company, but we have a set of metrics that are really, how to say that, directly involved within subscriptions. For instance, we have a metric that's called the churn, and the churn is really something important that we look at. The churn is basically how many people are cutting their relationship with the vendor, so cutting their subscription or unsubscribing. And when you look at churn, companies, it's a metric that companies will do their utmost keep the lowest possible. So companies will try to keep the churn the lowest possible. And we focus, it's really a metric that's at the heart of our investment strategy, if you think about it. Why? Because it gives us some insight on the health of the company. When churn goes up, means the company is doing something wrong, or either they're losing some subscriber for their competitor, for instance. So companies should focus on keeping churn low, and it's something that we try and derive for every company we have within our investment strategy. Now, another metric we look at, it's a metric called LTV, or lifetime value of a customer. So it's how much revenue a customer would generate for a company throughout their whole relationship, throughout the lifetime of their relationship. And logically, a company should try to maximize this lifetime value. It could do so using 2 ways. First of all, through cross-selling, so adding new services, cross-selling or upselling, having a wider area of services that it offers, or through increasing the lifespan of the relationship of a customer between them and their customer. So companies should minimize churn, maximize lifetime value. Now there's a third metric, and this is really fundamental. It's called CAC, so customer acquisition cost. And it's basically how much a company pays in order to acquire a new customer. And it could correspond to marketing spend. It could correspond to overhead spending that you spend on the sales team. And in the end, logically, what you try to do is minimize the CAC. So we monitor this LTV over CAC couple, where LTV should be much superior to CAC in order for a company to be profitable, to be able to sustain itself on the long run. So you have those 3 metrics. minimizing churn, maximizing LTV, and minimizing CAC. And if you are able to do that, the company should be able to enjoy to the fullest the benefits of the subscription-based model.
Okay, regarding these three metrics that you have mentioned, how often do you get this data from your investable companies?
I'm going to mainly focus on churn because it's a metric that's much more straightforward. For the other, it's something that you can extrapolate either from financial statements, and it's not something that usually companies on LTV and CAC, I mean, usually companies disclose. It's more relative to software and those kind of industries. But when it comes to churn, it depends on the companies. You have three kind of sources of data in the end. It's either a company discloses it in a very straight manner, quarterly or semi-annually or annually. It depends on the company if they want to do it. It's the case for companies such as Netflix that discloses the churn in the end. But sometimes we can't get it from the company. We can use broker research that enables us also through really extensive industry studies to extrapolate some numbers. And this helps us, again, to have a general idea of where the churn situates itself. And lastly, if nobody provides that, we will do the job through studying competitors, through studying the industry itself, and try also to extrapolate a rather precise number when it comes to churn for any given company we have within the strategy.
Okay. Which industries are the most advanced in the process of transformation or disruption?
Well, as I said before, you have the traditional industries that were born as subscriptions. So gym industries, for instance, these were not talk about them. But I'd say on the consumer side, there's the media industry. So you had the disruption coming from Netflix. We know that everybody's been, you had what we call cord cutting. So people paying less and less for pay TV. And everybody's been shifting more and more towards the streaming industry. So I'd say in terms of that, we are at the most mature part. And if you think about it, many actors in many other industries are trying to become the Netflix, that's how they say it, the Netflix of their own respective industries. Maybe another one, I'd say it's the connected fitness industry. We've seen a boom and acceleration. This is again on the consumer side, an acceleration in the year 2020 of connected fitness at home. And this is something that's become the norm when it comes to those industries. So if I had to pinpoint in the consumer side, I'd pick those two names. But on the B2B side, I'd pick software as a service. It's a transition that started at the beginning of this decade, around the year 2010, where companies understood that a subscription are a way to go with the likes of Microsoft and Adobe spearheading, if you want, this transition. It's the same with information and data provider. MSCI has almost certainly been a subscription business for as long as it has existed. Same could be with Bloomberg or FactSet and so on and so on. So I pinpoint those two industries to be maybe the most advanced when it comes to the transition.
Regarding this thematic, in the broadcasting TV, do you consider that the subscription model it runs better than the pay-per-view model for premium content?
I think both are obsolete, to be honest. I mean, pay-per-view is something that has been experimented by many actors in the end. And what you notice is that the whole industry is shifting towards what we call SVOD, streaming video on demand in the end. The traditional TV business has been declining in the US for 2% over the last, I don't know, probably 5 years, and something that we're seeing accelerating. So I can't pick between those two. If I had to pick one, is really shifting towards the streaming business. You have the like of Comcast that launched a service on Peacock. You have logically Disney that did the same. You have Paramount that's going into streaming. We're going to see more and more across the world. The US has always had, how to say that, the first mover advantage, if you want. But if you look at the rest of the world, we're going to see the same dynamics occurring there. So the traditional ways of looking at TV, the cable TV, pay TV, and pay-per-view are going to decline in favor of streaming for the many reasons we mentioned before. More convenient, more value for money, more content. And in the end, it's a more personalizable experience. You can pick whatever movie you want to watch, and the streaming platform will propose to you whatever other movie you need to watch, etc. So it becomes an experience rather than really being a simple consumer that's being fed what you wanna watch in the end.
That's clear. How many meetings do you have with companies per year?
Obviously, we try to do as much as we can. We recently ran the exercise. This is for Thematics Asset Management as a whole, still quite a small company. But since 2019, we had more than 1,000 meetings with management. So what we try to do, and obviously with the recent pandemic, it has become much easier to have meetings with management. So roughly, we try to meet with every management of companies we might own in the strategy at least once a year. It's something that's fundamental for us to have more clarity on the strategy, more clarity on the financials themselves. And even what we try to do is meet managements of competitors, because it would give you more insight on an industry itself, and sometimes would help you extrapolate some financial information that one management might not be able to say directly. So we try to do as much as we can, but on a fund level, on a strategy level, I'm sorry, we try to meet with every company that might be held in the portfolio at least once a
year. My perception is that nowadays the subscription-based business are more cyclical, but runs to be less cyclical. What is your perception, and how long take to be less cyclical than traditional business?
I'd say there's no real timeline. By definition, in my opinion, subscription are less cyclical than traditional business. And let me explain to you why we feel that. I mean, for a subscription, you're subscribed, you're tied in the ecosystem, and you're here. It's not a spending that you do in a very punctual manner or more discretionary manner. Maybe to explain myself a bit more clearer, let's take the example of the year 2020. So I know we had a pandemic. I know the world was almost at a full stop, if you think about it. The subscription-based companies, for them, was a relatively normal year. They didn't see any drastic shift in their sales. Some of them saw acceleration. Some of them, saw some churn. For the likes of Gym Club, for instance, they saw, obviously they were closed, so people were not going to gyms. But members were still within the ecosystem, were still paying. So again, this shows that there's some kind of resilience attached to subscription. Now, if you compare them to, I don't know, a restaurant industry or airline industry, their sales were close to zero during the pandemic. So this is kind of cyclical. And when you compare it to a subscription-based business, it wasn't the same. The sales never went to zero in the end. So this shows there's less cyclicality, more resilience within the business. And again, if you look at the year 2020, the subscription economy universe grew its sales by 12%, whereas if you look at the S&P, the growth was around 0%. So there's no really attached cyclicality, I'm going to say, for subscription, rather more resilience, I'm going to say. And it starts from at the beginning, as soon as the business and subscription is born. So there's no really timeline to answer your question to when the subscription business becomes less cyclical than a traditional business.
Okay, well, the time is up. So I have one last question to finish our conversation. Which is the first company that comes to your mind that best represents the subscription basis?
I'm sure you know which one I'm going to talk about. I know it's widely known by everybody, but it remains. I'm going to actually talk about two, but I'm going to talk about Netflix first. It remains the go-to name, the textbook story when everybody wants to go to a subscription. It's a company that started off mailing DVDs for people when DVDs were still something fashionable, that rode the technology wave, so cloud and the increase in internet speed quite smartly and transformed it into a streaming business. Netflix started with a bunch of millions of subscribers in the US. The average revenue per user was around $5 to $6. Fast forward to today, you have 216 million subscribers, an average revenue per user of 14 USD. The company has become a world leader in production. It spends more than 17 billion in cash in order to generate content. It has done everything right to be the perfect company when it comes to subscription, and it's reaping the benefits. If you look at Netflix today, it's generating cash. Its margins are starting to pick up. It's scaling its business, and it's really the best in class when it comes to that. And maybe another one on the business to business side, I would pick up Adobe. I was mentioning this transition within the software as a services. Well, it started with Adobe. Adobe in 2012 had little to zero growth, and the company shifted its business towards a subscription-based model. What happened? Sales plunged logically on the first year because subscriptions are cheaper. But what happened, if you look throughout time, the company is now growing more than 20% a year. So you went from 0 to 20% since 2012. So over the last 9 years, the company has been growing consistently. And on top of that, the company was specialized in the creative side, if you want, of software. They also, due to the fact that they were quite successful, were able to add what we call the Experience Cloud, so everything related to marketing. And as of today, the margins went, back in 2012, they were at roughly 30%. Now we're going to be something in excess of 40%. So this is, again, a textbook story of a very good transition. And it's also incited most of the software as a service industry to shift towards a subscription model. So I pinpoint those two names. It's very known names, but they're really the best in class when it comes to subscription, for sure.
Thank you very much, Walid, for the time to sharing your insights. It was very interesting.
Thank you, Carlos, for the insightful questions.